Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later in the program, one-on-one with Cory Gardner, you know, the congressman up north, out east, that guy. But first, what seems like a real discrepancy in, well, media. Why is it that Scott Gessler gets all this attention, but the governor doesn't for basically the same thing? Jason Worley's with me from Grassroots Radio on KLZ 560. Glad to have you.
Thanks. Good to be here.
All right, let's go to the state Secretary of State first. He went on a trip.
Yes.
He used some of his discretionary funds for that trip.
Correct.
A group called Ethics Watch, who works on the left, said, "You can't do that. It's wrong." And he said, "Yeah, I can, but here's the $1,300. I'll give it back." But that didn't stop it. What happened?
Well, let's see. Besides the Post getting great coverage, the Independent Ethics Commission here in Colorado picked up the case. It was tried by the head of SUE, Colorado Ethics Watch, and they actually fined him double the amount of the ethics violation.
So he spent $1,300 of government money. He paid that back, even though he could argue that it was legitimate. But then there was an ethics complaint, and so he needed to pay another $26,
right.
Something like that.
Right. That doesn't even count the cost of the defense or the investigation.
What got me about this was how much traction the detractors of Scott Gessler got. I mean, and good for them, but every step, every twist, every turn, there was a Denver Post story, there were newspaper stories and television stories and talk radio stories and lots of good chatter on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, they got mileage out of this.
They got a ton of mileage. They got a lot of great free press because the Denver Post carried, I believe I counted at the beginning, it was around 15 stories before the actual investigation even started.
Before the investigation even started.
Yes,
15 stories. Good for the Post. All right. You're watching television one night. You're watching Fox News. What do you see?
Well, the good news was because of my radio show, we were actually reading it live on air as the story came across about the governor taking a plane ride to Durango for the USA Pro Cycling Challenge and taking a organizer of the challenge with him, Ken Gart. Well, they didn't mention that he was a campaign donor. They did mention that the governor paid back the funds after the investigation had started.
Slow down. So, the governor has at his disposal a plane, and that plane flies around, and he can fly him different places. And by the way, that's good. It's a big state, and sometimes he needs to be here and he needs to be there. I've got no problem with that. But he goes to a cycling event, which is purely personal. He's not there in an official capacity, is he?
Well, that's debatable. That's something that I think the Independent Ethics Commission could answer. That point's debatable. What's not debatable is that he grabs one of his biggest donors, a max-out donor, which means he gave the maximum amount every year that Governor Hickenlooper's been in office, throws him on the plane with him and Governor Hickenlooper's son, and takes this plane flight.
Now, Scott Gessler paid back to the taxpayers $1,300. The governor is asked this question about why he had this from Channel 31, Fox 31, and what does the governor do?
He pays it back.
How much?
I believe it was right at $1,300.
$1,300. All right, so let me see if I understand this. Both of them had to do with plane rides. Both of them were going to different places. Both Scott Gessler pays back $1,300. Hickenlooper pays back $1,300. How many articles in the Denver Post about Hick paying back this money?
Zero. Not Zero. One since the ethics complaint has come out.
All right, now let's talk about an ethics complaint. You, as a citizen, did what?
Decided to work with a lawyer and file an ethics complaint with the Independent Ethics Commission here in Colorado.
What is that?
Yeah, you're going to get me on this one. It was set up, I believe it was Amendment 41? 41, that was set up basically to check on public officials receiving gifts. I mean, there was a whole thing about backroom deals and gifts that they were receiving from people. When they took on the Gessler case, it was kind of a new direction for them. They were breaking new ground. And they obviously ruled against him, and they've decided, and in that case, they state very clearly that paying back the money does not absolve one of an ethics violation. They said that very clearly in the Colorado Ethics Watch versus Gessler case.
So you have filed a complaint with the Ethics Commission
yes.
on basically the same subject that Scott Gessler got hooked on, with the governor, he pays back his $1,300.
It's close. There's one major difference.
All right.
Scott Gessler did not take a campaign contributor on the plane with him anywhere he went. I mean, to me, that raises even more questions. What were they discussing on that plane ride? I mean, were they talking politics? Were they talking, hey, how much more money can you help me raise in my next gubernatorial race? I mean, that's not state business.
All right, and by the way, I don't know if what Scott Gessler did was state business either. All right, I'm not.
Understood.
What I want to focus on is that here you got a guy with an R behind his name, and he is being raked over the coals for basically the same violation that Hick has done. And I want to know how many stories have been filed on this before you filed your complaint. With Scott Gessler, you said about 15 stories from the Denver Post.
There were 15 before the ethics complaint investigation began, before the Independent Ethics Commission accepted the case.
All right, and for you so far, goose egg. All right,
0.
got it. Now it has gone to the Ethics Commission. Where are we?
Well, we understand they declined to investigate it last week during their meeting, but they said they didn't have enough time. So they're going to consider this at the September 3rd meeting, so 2 weeks out.
So 2 weeks out, we'll decide they'll decide if they're going to look into it.
If they're even going to look into it.
Why the discrepancy? Why? I mean, whether or not, forget politics for a second. You got one guy on one team who's getting all sorts of press for ethical violation. You've got the same thing happening on another side. We don't know if it's the same, but no mention whatsoever. Speculate with me, Jason. What's going on?
Well, Tim Hoover initially, when the KDVR story came out in Denver Post and said this story.
He's one of the editorialists at the Denver Post.
He said there's nothing to it. Of course, once again he failed to take a look at the fact that Ken Gart was a max donor. He didn't mention that whatsoever. I think part of it is the Denver Post is trying to cover for Tim Hoover, coming out really early and saying there's no story here.
Maybe, I've got to say, I agreed with Tim Hoover for most of this story. The Fox 31 put on this story and they said, they're using this to fly cancer doctors to visit cancer patients. I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry, that doesn't get me all that upset. And it was this tiny little thing that really glossed over, and which I think should have been the story, which was this guy is using it for a personal business with one of his donors. That's the story. The rest of the stuff, I agree with Tim Hoover, was nothing.
I would agree with you completely. I think it is totally about the governor, his flight, who he took on the flight, who he chose not to take on the flight, and the fact he's actually come out and claimed, anywhere I take my son, I pay the state back. Well, you didn't until there was a KDVR story about it. So do you or don't you? I mean, this raises a lot of questions, and if that's what the Independent Ethics Board was set up to do, let him do it.
And, to be honest, I don't even mind if he takes his kid on these things. I would do the same thing. But for me, two different rules seem to apply, particularly with media coverage, and we're going to find out on September 3rd if two different things apply depending on the party. Who makes up the Ethics Commission? What is it?
It's 5 independently appointed members. They're supposed to be bipartisan. I actually don't have the breakdown right in front of me, but I think the governor's appointed, the Senate's appointed, the House is appointed. If you look at it, for the most part, every person on there was appointed by a Democrat.
Is it that the left has great organizations? It's got Ethics Watch that just does nothing but try to make big deals out of these things, and your team doesn't have that.
No, we actually have people like me who just have to say, you know what, I saw this story, I happen to be a radio show host, I'm going to file it.
What's going to happen? Give me a prediction.
Well, we'll see. Todd Shepard over at Complete Colorado just broke a story yesterday about an open records request sent to Scott Gessler's office from the Democratic Party asking for emails between myself and Scott Gessler, my co-host and Scott Gessler and my lawyer. So there must be something to this. It's either that or they're just trying to slime the trail up.
Congratulations. Let's check back in a month. Stay tuned. Let's talk to Cory Gardner, the congressman. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.